Hey everybody, how you doing? My name's Mark French. I'm a director of engineering at Payoneer. Actually used to work for a related company called Armor Payments, but we'll get into that in a minute. We're really talking here today about a product we call escrow as a service. And what we're really trying to solve is an issue where you have buyers and sellers who are interested in doing business with one another. They have a fundamental trust gap. So suppliers are concerned about sending goods or providing services before they get paid, and buyers are naturally concerned about paying for things that they're not sure they're actually going to receive. So particularly in the cases where you have an online marketplace that's trying to connect those buyers and sellers, trying to solve that payments problem is an important thing to be able to do, but it's something that the marketplace doesn't necessarily want to have to focus on. And we provide what we think is a pretty good solution to help them handle that. So if you imagine a transaction as a sort of a very simple set of steps where a buyer places funds into escrow, which is held by us, we notify the supplier that we've received those funds. The supplier is then able to ship goods, deliver services, sort of complete their end of the transaction. They notify us that that's happened, or in the case of goods, we're actually able to track the shipment and determine for ourselves that the goods have arrived, which notifies our system. And the buyer is then able to tell us that they're satisfied with what they've received and instruct us to actually release funds to the seller. That's all fine and good, but you're here to see a demo. So I'm going to give you one. It's a live demo, so let's hope it works. I have here a very sophisticated marketplace site. You can tell I spent a lot of time putting this together. But I might like to look at some widgets. We have a premium widget line. I don't know why you'd ever go for the budget widget line. So let's order some premium widgets. And it's gonna ask me here for some basic information as the buyer. Basically enough contact information for us to know who both parties to the transaction are, and for you to make sure that if you are receiving physical goods, the seller will know where to send them. So some basic fields here, I've gone ahead and filled them out in advance. And we have a little bit of an explanation down here about why escrow is something that's being offered for this transaction, and why you as a participant in the transaction might care. So this is all set up. This form is ready to go, but there's some question as to what happens when you actually submit it. So let's take a look. If I could actually get this to. So this is an incredibly basic Ruby on Rails site. We work in Ruby. We offer SDKs in a number of other languages. I happen to pick Ruby because it's a little bit easier to see on the screen, but we're a RESTful API. We're relatively agnostic to your technology. But in this case, I'm going to create a new order. So I'm going to set up the buyer, store it in the local system. I'm going to go get a client. This is just an SDK client from our SDK. It's provided with an API key and appropriate credentials. At this point, we're going to call this Armor create account method. And so we're going to hand it a client and just a set of parameters about the user that we want to use here. I've gone ahead and set up the JSON for the fields, but you'll notice that it's just a direct mapping of the fields from the form. This is data that you probably already have about your customers. If you don't, it's data that's perfectly reasonable, to ask the customer to provide. And what remains then is to actually pump it into the Armor system. So this is super easy. Oops. If I could type, it would probably be easier. This returns in the Ruby case just a standard XCON result object. In other language SDKs, it returns equivalently convenient objects that are just the result of an HTTP request. We could do a bunch of fancy error handling here, but we're short on time. So let's just hope it worked. I'm just going to return the body. That's it. That's all we had to do there. So hooray, right? That was nice and simple. So we now have this account. We got the Armor account here. We're going to store the account ID that Armor Payments passed back into our local object just so we can reference it later. And then we're going to go, we created an account. There was a user that was created with it. We might like to retrieve some data about that user. So we have another method that's this Armor create user. Sorry, Armor get user, my bad. The user was in fact already created when the account was created. So you just saw a create method. Let's try a get method. So we're actually going to retrieve a set of users. Which you can, well, my IDE wasn't trying to be smarter than me. Just like that. The SDK makes this really easy, but even if you're doing this by hand, it's really a question of constructing the right URL and providing the right credentials. And in this case, we'll just get the first one off that list and return it. So we're back up here now. We've got both an account and a user. There's an existing seller account in the system that already exists in Armor Payments. You could use exactly the same method to create a new one if you wanted to, but in this case, we've already got one. We're going to create a local order object, give it a little bit of information about who the buyer and the seller are, and then we're going to make the last API call here to create an order in Armor's system. So that's right here. Again, I've set up just a simple object to contain the fields that we care about. We need a type. Type 1 is an order for goods. There's a list of types in our API documentation. It's not a terribly long list, but you do have some options. In this case, because we know it's an order for goods, it'll handle tracking a shipment. The identifiers for the buyer and the seller, the amount of the order, and then just a summary. Description is optional, as is message, but we've thrown them in here for the sake of flavor. Again, we're just going to assume that that worked. And we've now created an order. So I'm, I don't know, 4 minutes into an integration here. And I've got accounts and users and orders. We could actually try it. Live demo success. Hooray. So again, my incredibly sophisticated marketplace site is giving you some information about this order that we just created. And the next step, now that the order exists, Armor Payments can optionally notify both the buyer and the seller that the order's been created. You have the option of asking us to not send those messages, and you can handle communication with your customer yourself. We're happy to do it either way. But the buyer's next step is to actually pay for the order, to place funds in escrow. Normally that's handled through a system where the buyer can view a set of payment instructions and then go and actually provide payment. In this case, we're in a test environment, so I have a helpful link in which the buyer can solemnly swear to us that they have provided funds. Let's imagine they did that. At this point, Armor Payments will notify you as the integrator and both the buyer and the seller that that's happened. We provide a really simple webhook mechanism that will notify you of just about every step you see happen in the process here and a few that you don't, which makes that really simple to stay on top of. The seller can ship the goods, and we're going to use, again, an incredibly sophisticated mechanism to supply shipping details. That's already done. It's a simple API call in our test environment. Works just fine in production. We also have an option where you can have the seller provide them themselves. And so the last thing left now is we wait for UPS. I guess they're fast today, so the goods have arrived. And we're going to ask the buyer to release funds from escrow and actually pay the seller. So in this case, I skipped a step. So we have a mechanism whereby you can receive a pre-authenticated URL that we're going to use to open in a lightbox to actually place a page in front of the user. That page is hosted by Armor Payments. We use this for some of the more secure data transaction items, but also in cases where we want to give the opportunity to the end user to actually sort of personally affirm that they want to, for example, release funds from escrow. And in order to do that, we need to actually make an API call. The reason it didn't work is I hadn't written it yet, so sorry. So again, not terribly complicated. Maybe we'll try it again now that I wrote the code. Often works better that way. Your mileage may vary. Typing is an important skill. I recommend you learn to do it. It might save you embarrassment on stage someday. Maybe not. Some people are sort of gluttons for that kind of thing. So here we opened this up in an iframe. Didn't do a very good job of styling my iframe, sorry. But this content is actually being hosted by Armor Payments, and it's presented to the user to let them know, here are the details of your order. You're clicking here to indicate that you were satisfied with the goods or the services you received. It's goods in this case, but it could be either. And they get this nice green button here to release payment. That's it. They're done. Congratulations. We win. So that's an entire escrow transaction from end to end. Just a few notes here. We do provide a number of features that I didn't have time to demo today because 10 minutes isn't a lot of time to write an integration. But we handle dispute management. We have an arbitration service where if you're not able to settle the dispute on our platform, we have a transparent and a fair mechanism to handle that. And with Payoneer handling the payout side of this process, we really are very global with this. It's supported in 200 countries, about 150 different currencies. So this is something that you can use in a lot of different places and a lot of different use cases. Because of that sort of synergy, Armor Payments was in fact recently acquired by Payoneer. That's official as of 2 weeks ago today, which is why you may have seen a little bit of confusion about the branding. We're working on it. We'll get there soon. But that's what I have for you. Thank you very much for showing up today. Thank you for your time. And please do feel free to stop by and see us at our booth.